To go ahead and get started with her introduction, that would be great.
Sure. Well, we had a nice transition there. So, again, everybody who's still on the call, thank you for attending the Coalition on Intercollegiate Athletics annual meeting. We hope you find our programming helpful as we delve into student athlete safety and wellness issues. And in this case, it's going to be Title IX. Following the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. Please type your questions into the chat box and they will be read for the presenter. So our presenter for this session is Beth Howard. She holds degrees from the University of Alabama and Georgia State College of Law. Beth worked in private practice for 10 years before transitioning into higher education. In 2013, she was named the University of Alabama Title IX coordinator. In 2019, she was named the executive director of equal opportunity and Title IX programs at the university. Beth oversees the university's compliance with Title IX and other laws related to equal opportunity. Today, Beth will discuss how a strong working relationship between an institution's Title IX office and their athletic department plays a role and can enhance student athlete wellness. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. And I don't know if y'all got the prior speaker to mention Title IX right before I came on, or if that was just a good chance there. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with y'all just because it helps me stay on track and not ramble as much. Let me get that going. All right. So, slideshow. No matter how many times I do this, I always fumble a little bit. Am I sharing the right screen or am I sharing my?
Nope, you're sharing your other screen.
All right. Sorry.
I do it wrong 100% of the time too, Beth.
There you go, Beth. It works
That's
good.
better. All right. Since I already have the introduction there, I will skip that slide, but I wanted to just kind of give you an overview. And I thought about, what is the best ways to talk about how, the University of Alabama's Title IX office works with the athletic department. And I think the big thing that I'm the most proud of is how we handle our training and how that plays itself out into how we do our everyday, work. So I kind of wanted just to give you some background. I think probably all of you know about Title IX, but just a short little overview, how that plays in with equity, which is a part of that. But then also the main things that I want to talk about is the sexual misconduct side. And then how we created our training plan. I'm really proud of our training plan. So I think it's effective. Each school needs to do what's best for them, but I'll let y'all know what we're doing on our end, and then hopefully have a lot of time for any questions you might have. All right, so what is Title IX? It is a federal law. It was enacted in 1972. It addresses sex discrimination in education programs or activities. Any enforcement is through the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. There is a private right of action, meaning universities or individuals could be sued under Title IX. And the law that was originally created is just that little bit down there. All right, that's all that it is. But there's so much that goes with it now. So I wanted to give you just a short little bit of history. So I took the job as a Title IX coordinator in 2013. And before that, I was an attorney working in private practice, doing different types of things. I read the Dear Colleague letter and I thought, I could do this. This seems pretty straightforward. Boy, was I wrong. It's not straightforward at all. It is incredibly political. For something that you would think maybe should not be so political, it is. So we had a Dear Colleague letter in 2011. And that really made institutions reevaluate what they were doing. Do we have a Title IX coordinator? I think most people ask that question. And if they do, who is it? Does anybody know? And do they know? That was a big question for some people. Did you know you're the Title IX coordinator? So things like that needed to be figured out. Now schools are pretty up to speed on that. The 2011 letter that I originally thought seemed pretty straightforward and clear, it was so unclear that in 2014, they had to issue FAQs to explain the original letter. The FAQs were about 3 times as long as the original letter, just to give you some context there. And then 2015, there was some more guidance that came out. 2017, all that guidance got withdrawn with the Trump administration. So the 2011, 14, and 15 was put out by the Obama administration. Trump administration comes in, withdraws that guidance, and says, we're going to do regulations. The proposed regulations were put out. Some of the most commented on regulations, I think, that there has been. They released the proposed rule in November of 2018, and we were all just kind of waiting to see, what is it going to look like? What are we going to do? We're all doing our regular work. Then March of 2020 comes, and at the University of Alabama, this is my Hug Your Title IX coordinator speech, okay? University of Alabama goes out because, like most schools, COVID hits. Our office, which is normally a very, let's meet in person, let's talk about what's going on, let's try to talk and walk through what's happening, not just for those who are making the reports, but those who are accused. These are very sensitive, tough things that, our students are going through when they come to us. Had to figure out how to make that same connection with our students online. All right, so we're working with that, trying to figure out how to get, what is DocuSign? We learned that, working on all that. And then in May, right when we're really starting to get that going, they hit us with 2,033 pages of regulations. And so you've got 100 days to get those enacted and in a policy. So in the midst of all the COVID, your Title IX folks were, immersed in all of that. Now we have a new administration, and we're just waiting to see if all that's going to go away and something new is going to come in. But regardless, I think these are goals that have kind of been consistent no matter what administration is in and no matter what guidance is put out. All right, so the provide equal opportunity, that's the big goal there. And not just in participation and, gender equality, pregnancy, equal opportunity spans, several different things. And then prevent sexual misconduct. There's a lot to that. First we got to figure out, what is sexual misconduct? And the regulations really gave us, some good, guidance and definitions on what the federal government is saying sexual misconduct is. And, it includes gender and sex discrimination, sexual and gender-based harassment. We have our own little category of sexual exploitation. Some schools lump that into sexual harassment, but we want to make it very clear that exploiting someone for a sexual purpose is prohibited. So we have that as a separate category, sexual assault, dating, domestic violence, and then stalking. And then I think, they want to be clear, schools need to address this. There's differing opinions of how schools need to do that and what jurisdiction schools have. But, the bottom line is, especially with things that happen on campus, schools need to address that and then remediate the effects of the sexual misconduct. So if that means helping somebody get back on track, if they have kind of, missed class because they were filing a police report or, whatever is going on with that, or if they don't feel safe on campus, how can we take steps to make sure that their safety is, a priority? All right, so briefly talking about the equal opportunity side, there's 3 prongs there to what athletic departments need to look at to make sure that they're being equitable with their participation, scholarships, and benefits are the 3 big things. So for participation, there's different ways you can gauge that. But what they're looking at is men and women should have equitable opportunities to participate. I think what a good bit of schools do is look at their enrollment and, do proportionality based on their enrollment. And I'm sure, as most of you know, female enrollment is greater and on many campuses than male enrollment. So you need to have that proportionality there. Scholarships dollars must be proportional as well. Benefits, you have to have comparable equipment, supplies, scheduling, all of that. There are groups that come and do, audits for, the benefits and the facilities and things like that. And they'll get down to measuring spaces for locker rooms to make sure that those facilities are equitable. Now there is there's an amendment, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but there's an amendment that says, when it comes to spending on certain supplies, it makes sense that maybe pads for football are going to cost more than shin pads for soccer. So they take that into account. It's not just a dollar for dollar, but you really have to evaluate what you're doing, what you're spending your money on, and make sure that that's equitable. All right, so this is the big thing that my office deals with every day, and the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about today, and that's sexual misconduct in athletics. So every school, I always think, and I have said this myself, we want to eliminate sexual misconduct. Well, we do. All right, but every school is going to be dealing with that. And if somebody knows how to completely eliminate it, I hope they share it with the world, because that would be great. But it's going to be something that, you have to continue dealing with. You get new students in every year. You have to teach them, what your rules and your processes are. So it's something everybody must address. And it has far-reaching impacts. In the athletic world, it would, of course, impact the student. It would impact possibly the team. Our student athletes often live with each other, so might impact other members of the team because they're roommates. It could impact the entire athletic department. It could impact the entire school. So, we want to make this a priority, not just at our institution, but within our athletic department, within our teams, and across campus. When it comes to college sports, sexual impact or sexual violence is going to be in the news. When I do the training for our student athletes, I often tell them, in the year 2000, when Miss Beth was a political science student at UA, if she was arrested for any kind of misdemeanor, like most of our or some of our dating violence, domestic violence, criminal charges are misdemeanors, or our alcohol offenses could be a misdemeanor. Nobody but my parents would know. But if you get arrested, it's going to be in the news. So for a student athlete, that, of course, no one wants to be arrested, but that's additional, I can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but an additional concern for them, their future, their family, things such as that. And it's becoming very litigious, especially with the new regulations. There's going to be, anytime there's regulations, there's going to be more lawsuits while they kind of flesh out what those regulations mean. But sexual misconduct, Title IX cases have become increasingly litigious on both sides. We call it respondent, that's the accused. Respondent litigation is increasing, and then complainant litigation has been increasing for some time. All right, so what does the NCAA say about all of this? In May of 2018, the NCAA put forward a policy. It was the NCAA Board of Governors policy on sexual violence. And they've tweaked it some. So this is what they're requiring right now. Schools have to annually attest to these 5 things. So the first 2 are the main ones that, we are dealing with when we think of our training plan. All right, and that's the athletic department is informed on, integrated in, and compliant with institutional policies regarding sexual violence prevention and adjudication. I can't remember the word they used previous, but instead of informed on, it was basically like they know them, they understand them. So I think that they decided, yeah, we're not going to go for understanding quite yet. We're just going to make sure that you know them. And then the big number 2 is the name of the Title IX coordinator is available. It's provided to student athletes. They know who that person is. They know where they can go to report. The big thing about that is making sure that there's somebody outside of athletics that the student athletes can go to make a report, even if it involves, if it involves somebody not on campus, if it involves a teammate. They don't feel like they have to report that through athletics and have fear of any kind of repercussions or anything like that. And then, numbers 3, 4, and 5, they deal with prior instances of sexual violence, sexual misconduct. The SEC has a rule. It's the SEC, misconduct rule, serious misconduct rule, that says if you have been found guilty of certain offenses, and that includes dating, domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, or if you have been found responsible by an institution of those offenses, you can't transfer to another SEC school or into a SEC school. So, we already have that in place, and I know some other conferences also have similar rules in place. And then the SEC is having, the NCAA has reporting requirements now. So they're telling the institutions, you have to go seek this information out. You have to ask the players, then you have to ask their schools. And then if you find it out, you've got to let us know too, so we can be aware of that. All right, so what we did, we were already doing some training before the NCAA requirement. We were doing it mainly with our student athletes and with our professional staff. And we had talked about, how we could expand that. In my opinion, if you are looking back at this right here and saying, you know what, all employees are provided with annual training, and it talks about, institutional policies on sexual violence and prevention. All of our students are provided with that training. So that means that athletic department employees and student athletes got the training, we're good to go. To me, I think that probably meets the requirements, but to me, that's doing us a disservice. All right. So that's why I say here, like thinking beyond that, check the box. What are we using our time for, and what do we hope to gain from this? So one thing that, I always do when I'm thinking about, whether I'm coming to talk to you all or a certain group or, our, Greek life or whoever, freshmen, whoever, what are the priorities for me and what are the priorities for this group? All right. And looking, our student athletes have unique priorities and unique situations than any other student on campus. All right. Their time constraints, they not only have time constraints just because they are busy, but there's also time constraints that the athletic department can put on them to say, you need to be in this training. We want to be concerned about everybody's health and safety. How can our training make you healthier, make you more aware of resources, make you safer? And then this was all, and these are not in any particular order, by the way, making good choices. This is a big thing for me. Like, what choice are you going to make that's going to impact you 10 years from now or tomorrow? Make those good choices now. Think about your future. Always think 2 or 3 steps ahead. Academics. There's not a training I do with student athletes that I don't tell them at the end, go to class. Take advantage of this. But we also are thinking about their social development, their career development. How are you going to behave in a professional setting? What are we doing as a university to make sure you understand when you're in an office, this is how you behave, or when you're coaching a football team, this is how you behave. And these are the social requirements of respecting one another and not being discriminatory or harassing in any way. And developing healthy relationships. Some of our student athletes and our students in general don't come from situations where they have good examples of healthy relationships. So what are we doing when they get here to show them what that could look like? To show them that that's something that they could have in the future. And then these others, risk management, success, inclusion, responsibility, all of these things we think about when we're trying to decide what we're going to do for training at that time. All right, so the basics of our plan. I am incredibly blessed here at the University of Alabama. The top down, there's no convincing the top, because the top is the one saying we're doing this training. All right, we're doing it. It's important. It's not a requirement. It's an opportunity. Okay, so it's prioritized from the top down. It's multifaceted, meaning, yes, there might be something online, but there's going to be in person. There's going to be postings. There's going to be, statements made by your coach. There's going to be different ways that we're getting this information to you, so you're not just hearing it one time a year. And it's going to be comprehensive. It's not just going to be student athletes. It's going to be everybody that's involved, and it's not just going to be the student athletes necessarily in the room. We want the coach to stand there and make a statement saying, hey, y'all, this is important to me too. All right, it's important to the university, it's important to me. And then the student athletes respond better to that, I think. It's tailored to UA. There's lots of really good training out there that, is about bystander intervention and things like that. And we do utilize some of that. But what I am most proud of is, our simple, meet with the team, let's talk about what UA policies are. And then I give some examples, that, might be relevant to them or their situation. We even try to tailor it by the team. So if I'm talking to the softball team about safety, and I say, if you're concerned about walking to your car, I know y'all park across the street from Rose Stadium. So I try to relate to them and let them know, like, I know what's going on with you. You think about your safety and what we could do. And it's continuous. Like I said, this is happening not just once a year. They're hearing about this over and over. All right. So our goals of the training plan, we want a culture here of prevention and reporting. And that means a lot of different things. Prevention meaning I know what is prohibited and what's not. So I'm going to make sure that I'm behaving in a way. If I see my teammate doing something that I think might be, risky for them, I'm going to, talk to them about it. If I see my teammate in a situation where they might get hurt, I'm going to help them. And then reporting when they need help. And like I said, increasing their understanding of what sexual misconduct means and what consent means. Promoting their overall health and safety. If you have a healthy relationship, then your overall health is going to be better. If you can recognize when your relationship is becoming unhealthy, that's going to help your overall health and safety because you know who you can go to and where you can go to get assistance if you need help getting out of that relationship. Promoting the healthy relationships, bystander intervention, healthy choices. And this was the big thing, developing a strong relationship between the Title IX office, the athletics department, and the student athletes. I very much enjoy doing the training for the student athletes. They have great questions. There is one that's graduating this year, and I'm gonna hate to see him go because he giggles every time I give examples. And I'll tell you, sometimes I get, I don't say graphic, but I try to make them think about situations they might be in. And it doesn't matter, he's gonna laugh, and then it makes me laugh, and we're good. But I want to develop those relationships because I don't want this office to be seen as somewhere that, oh, I don't want to go there because you go there, you get in trouble. No, that's not the case. You go here for help. And that's what we want to have that relationship. All right, so what do we do as part of our student athlete plan? And this is just kind of a broad overview. We tweak it every year depending on what's going on. Like for example, this year, most of our training was by Zoom because we didn't want to, expose our student athletes to any of us. They were keeping in their bubble and they were doing really good with that. But we really like doing those in person. So typically, starting right end of July through the first or so week in September, we do new student athlete training, and then we do small group training. So the new student athletes, they will get kind of the bland, like here's our rules, here's resources, that sort of stuff. And I say bland, I mean, it's good information. The small group training, we normally do that by team. So, we might have, 15 people in a room, and that's great. But we'll do the small group training. We typically do around 40 of those between that time. So it's a big time commitment there. But we'll talk about the information for UA, and then we'll focus on something to really, get conversation going, get people talking back and forth. One year we did consent. There's a T video. We played the T video. We talked about that. We talked about what consent means and got, interaction that way. And then we noticed that, some of our student athletes, could possibly use some information about healthy and unhealthy relationships. So the next year we really focused on that. We talked about what does a healthy relationship look like? What does an unhealthy relationship look like? And what can you do if you think that you are in an unhealthy relationship? And then last year, or as 2 years ago, we focused on bystander intervention. Last year, we just did another kind of renewal of UA policies and procedures, mainly because we don't get as much participation on Zoom, as I'm sure some of you might know in your classes. But what we try to do is talk about something, talk about, if something's going on in the athletic department that we've noticed a trend or something like that, we're going to incorporate that in training. And then in the spring, we'll follow that up with some guest speaker on sexual misconduct. Typically, I'll introduce the person so they're seeing my face again, or I'll talk at the end of that presentation to remind them, like, hey, y'all, Miss Beth here. If you need anything, let me know. We've got our coaches will make statements in team meetings when we do our staff training. I'll usually say, here's some good topics if y'all want to talk about these in your team meetings. And I get good feedback that, yeah, coach mentioned this, or, we talked about how, we could report right to you if we need to. So that's really good. It kind of goes back to that from the top. The top coach is saying, hey, we want you to report these things if they happen to you. And, the student athletes are listening to that. We include sexual misconduct reporting, our policies, resources, and things like that in the student athlete handbook. And then we have a wonderful SWA Tiffany Grimes, who's also one of our harassment officers, she created these sticker stalls for the bathroom, and they have a QR code on there and they can get all the information, and those are posted around in restrooms and locker rooms and those types of places. And then of course we have the overall plan. So that includes everybody else. You know, there we have statements of support by the president and athletic director. And I'll give you an example of that. At our all staff meeting this year, you know, the president spoke first and talked about the importance of reporting, Title IX, you know, the resources we have on campus, and it was great. And that was followed up by our athletic director. So it really showed that, and that's a meeting where all the coaches, you know, all the staff are in that meeting. I mean, I think it really showed a commitment, you know, by the university to this issue. And then I provided training to them as well. Sometimes we will have outside speakers come in and talk during that meeting as well. You know, we'll have training for coaches. You know, sometimes we'll do that in the all staff meeting. Sometimes those are separate meetings, but all of the coaches are going to receive training. When we get new coaches in, you know, I'm going to go over and I'm going to say hi to them and I'm going to talk to them and make sure they know, you know, who I am and what we do here at the university. And we also include our student workers and others, you know, and others meaning, and I'm not sure, Jerry can probably tell you exactly what they fall into, but, you know, we have a lot of student trainers here. So we include them on our training as well, just to make sure that they know, you know, here's what we, you know, expect from you as a professional, and here's what we expect from our student athletes as well. And, you know, to create a culture there where they know if something's going on, they can report it as well. And that includes equipment managers, you know, anybody that we can identify as associated with athletics. All right, so this is my goal, and we will work on this every year. I don't think I will ever say that we have achieved this. All right, and because I think if we do, then we're falling behind. So we want to create a culture that encourages reporting by standard intervention. We're getting pretty good at that, I'm gonna tell you. All right, every year that we do training, I will have somebody walk up to me, and I'll give you an example. I had a student athlete come up a couple years ago and say, hey, you remember when we were talking about bystander intervention? I saw somebody walking down the sidewalk and they looked like they had too much to drink. They were kind of stumbling around. So I pulled over and I asked them if I could call a friend, and I stood there with them until their friend got there. That's awesome. That made me so happy. You know, those kind of things, we just want them thinking about it because they're great kids. We just want them thinking about what they can do. You know, and this is a big one, you know, normalizing student athletes interacting with the Title IX office. If you look at, you know, news articles and things like that, I think they often make it seem like the Title IX office and the athletic department are somehow at odds. And that's not what it should be. You know, we have standards for our students, and we expect our students to meet those standards. I'm also not going to assume because someone is a student athlete that they are going to break our rules or get away with breaking our rules. You know, so we want to normalize the interactions where if somebody's talking to me, that doesn't mean they're in trouble. You know, it could just mean they're saying hi to me. You know, often I have meetings in, you know, in our athletic facilities, you know, and there'll be a student athlete that'll say, hey, Miss Beth, how are you doing? And that's the goal there, to get to where they feel comfortable just saying, hey, how you doing? And they know who I am. So if they need something, then they know, you know, where they can go. You know, and the training, we want it to be engaging. You know, we try to think of things, you know, sexual misconduct training is not something that people really look forward to going to, okay? So we try to make it where, one, we're not being, you know, accusatory, but we're also explaining impacts of conduct, and then also, you know, making sure that we're providing people with information so when they leave, they're better prepared going forward as student athletes. Like I said, to make it encouraging, we want to encourage them. We want to encourage them to, if they see a risky situation that they feel like they can intervene in safely, to do that, empower them with those things. You know, make the Title IX office a resource, make them more aware of the impact on, you know, their health, others, their safety, you know, that sort of thing. And one thing that I didn't put in here, but I will mention real quick, you know, and I don't know how it is at your particular institution, but you know, student athletes can sometimes be more at risk than others. So, you know, I think the SEC network has been great for our student athletes. It's wonderful, you know, but I'll often tell them, you know, you're on TV and people might think they know you, you know, so we need to look out for your safety better, or, you know, making sure that you feel safe going to your car, or, receiving emails, if you get something, let somebody know so we can be proactive about that. But also making sure that they're aware that people want to be around them. And that's great. But to be aware of who they're allowing around them, because that really could impact, their health, their safety, and all of that moving forward. So, we try to make it more, like I said, a resource for our students and our student athletes, understanding that they're in a different situation than Beth was when she was a political science student in 2000. So, all right. So that was my end. I'll stop the screen share and answer any questions y'all might have.
So thank you very much for a great presentation, Beth. And also thank you for doing a job on campus that I think a lot of us would not want to take on, to be honest. So there's a question from Joan King. When do sexual assault cases get referred to the police?
All right, so there's two. There is at the University of Alabama, our police department also handles clery reports. All right, so let's take the clery reports aside, because that's more just reporting for statistical purposes for that annual safety report. The new regulations do not require reports to the police. The prior guidance would say we need to make people aware that they can report to the police, but we can't report that for them. All right. So what we would look at is, do we see an overall campus safety issue, knowing that that has to be very narrowly tailored before we would report without someone's consent. Now, one thing that we do, every report that we get, we have, a very long letter that's got a lot of information in it. And it also includes, you can report this to our university police department or local police or wherever the jurisdiction might be. And we've actually helped people, connect with the police. I will tell you, my preference is every one of them be reported to the police, but we have to defer to what the victim or the complainant wants to do.
So we have a question from Sean Walker. What role do you think the reasonable person standard has on compliance with Title IX and the lack of a universal definition of sexual misconduct play on some of the incidents that we see in college athletics?
Okay. So the reasonable person standard.
Sean, and Sean can chime in if he can get on, and maybe he can clarify what he's actually asking.
Yeah, that might be helpful.
Yeah, are you all able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm the faculty senate president, University of Tennessee at Martin. I'm also an HR professor. And so one of the things that I know when we get into Title IX compliance with things like sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, is the reasonable person standard comes into play, which is, would a reasonable group of, your peers view this in the same way that you do? And we know from the way that litigation has gone across the country that some incidences of sexual misconduct or harassment are viewed differently throughout this country. And so I'm wondering, based off of that, is how does that factor into, especially when you think of student athletics, who a lot of our athletes, they transfer from different areas of the country, and the things that they were trained on in one part of the country may be different than, like you had mentioned, Beth, in the SEC. You have a completely different definition. So they may have thought that was acceptable, or at least wasn't inappropriate, but now they've come to the SEC and it's not. Also, another component of that is, I'm at a smaller school. We don't necessarily train our students probably to the extent that you all do. So what role on the ambiguity of that does that factor in? And then also, what happens when we don't know, if Washington State views sexual misconduct differently than Alabama, for example?
Yeah, and I think, so the reasonable person comes in, the standard to determine whether someone has violated policy. You can either choose with these new regulations, clear and convincing, or you can choose preponderance of the evidence. All right. if you choose clear and convincing, everything else has to be, or sorry, if anything else is clear and convincing, then the standard has to be clear and convincing. We have chosen preponderance of the evidence. So that's what we have. And that's when you look at would a reasonable person in a similar situation feel that this was a hostile environment. So, severe, pervasive, that sort of thing. Now, when it comes to things like dating, domestic violence, sexual assault, which could include like fondling or rape, or stalking, then that's more of the, you meet the elements of what happened. So the reasonable person doesn't come into play as much. It does some with stalking, but otherwise you're looking at consent, or violence or things like that. Now, when it comes to the different standards, so there are some states that require verbal affirmative consent. All right, so you have to ask and you have to get a yes for each sexual act for you to be considered to have consent. That's not how it is in Alabama. So the way that we teach that is a willingness to participate in whatever that activity is. And we say it can be verbal or it can be through actions. Now I will say I have gotten some very funny questions about what would this action be considered consent. All right. But that is a difference there. So if someone is coming from, a school in California that might have that, affirmative consent rule in place, or leaving Alabama and going to California, that's probably a better example, then, they would need to be aware that that is a different standard. Did I answer your question at all, Sean? I don't know if I did.
Yeah, you did. I appreciate you addressing that. I just think that that's part of the ambiguity in college athletics right now is the fact that, like you mentioned, somebody goes from Alabama to California. They thought one thing was appropriate, and now it no longer is.
Yeah, and and when it comes to like some of the reporting requirements and things like that, Alabama might have a different standard where someone would be found responsible for something. But if that happened at another school, their rules might have them not responsible. So, I see what you're saying there. It would be helpful when you're saying you can't transfer to a school if you're found responsible if all those schools were playing by the same rules and the same definitions.
So I think Pamela Langford has a really good question. I think a lot of us are concerned about or wondering about. So can you address how your institution is addressing the changes in regulations related to witness cross-examination?
Okay. That could be a whole hour plus program. So when we started looking at that, we kind of anticipated it, but you couldn't really decide how you were going to handle it until we got the final regulations. So when we started looking at that, we went with how I think a lot of schools did. So we have one bucket where we say, this is a Title IX process case. And if it meets those specific requirements where, it would be fall under the Title IX regulations, then we handle those cases that way. If it doesn't, meaning maybe it happened off campus or the complainant isn't a student, but our respondent is, and was something we still want to address, those are sexual misconduct processes, and they are handled like our old policy, meaning, our office would issue a letter of findings, and if either party wanted to appeal, they could then request a hearing, which does not involve cross-examination. Now, to answer your question, the Title IX process, the way that we are interpreting that is that the parties are entitled to an advisor that can conduct live cross-examination at a hearing. Okay, but they can only ask questions that are relevant. So we are using our decision maker to ask all the, this gets really into courtroom jargon here, but direct examination questions will be asked by our decision maker. And our goal is to get all of the relevant evidence out through direct cross-examination. So then most of the questions would no longer be relevant because they're asked and answered, but there will be some that are relevant. So there will be some cross-examination there. I'll tell you, we're having our first hearing not too long from now, because those went in place in August, so we're starting to get those in the hearing queue. But we're going to put together, or we have put together, courtroom, hearing decorum, and things like that. The questions need to be addressed to our decision maker, instead of the party, and then the decision maker will make the relevancy determination. But that's going to be tough for every school. You have some decision makers who are going to be really, or sorry, not decision maker, you're going to have some advisors who are going to be really great at asking questions. And then what happens when the student brings their friend as their advisor? And maybe they're not so great at asking questions. So those are things that, or you have someone that's really aggressive that's asking questions. You got to have a strong decision maker there to be able to say, you're breaking the decorum rules. So that's something I think every school is going to struggle with. And it might be something that changes, with the new administration. We're just kind of waiting to see.
Joan, would you like to ask your question?
I've always wondered, why don't we have a zero tolerance rule for student athletes and maybe other students on campus? Like if they commit a crime of some sort, should we just say you're off the team forever kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that depends on the crime, and I'm thinking of, something that it didn't involve our student athletes, but, we've had, issues where in Alabama, if a law enforcement officer sees some kind of, something that would fall under, dating violence, then they are obligated to make an arrest. So we've had situations where, students are outside of, we call it the strip, the local bars and things like that, and they get an argument and start pushing each other. Well, that's enough to make both of them arrested. So, because they're arrested for dating violence, should they not be allowed to go to school? And you have to weigh that. Alabama also has a harassing communications law, and that could be considered dating violence. So, if I tell the person that I've been dating, I don't want to see you anymore and don't contact me anymore, and then that person continues to contact me, I could get a warrant for harassing communications, even though that contact might not be threatening or anything like that. So, I think it really depends on what that person did. I'm always, the first thing I want to see is there anything this university can do that can help this person be a better person? And if we can get to that, and we still say, all right, and if we do that, while we're doing that, people can still be safe. All right, because that's kind of two things. Then that's kind of where I always lean. But there are some things that I will tell you will get you removed from school, and you'll probably not get to come back, at least to this school. Like things like rape and that sort of stuff.
What's the general range from low to high of the consequences of?
Yeah. Well, we put in our policy that it can be nothing to expulsion. And we actually wrestle with this all the time, with whether we should try to make it, more like if you do this, then that. But every case is so different that it's hard to put things in boxes. And with the new regulations too, this is kind of off of your question, but sometimes we can't move forward without the complainant's cooperation because of that live cross-examination and all of that. So, we just try to look at it as, all right, if we use our resources to help you, does that make you a better person? And does that keep campus safe? And if the answer is, no, then, maybe you should not be here. But yeah, we look at each one to kind of see, we try to say this is a similar case to this case, and this is what we did here, and that was reasonable. But that's kind of how we handle it here. So.
I think Robert Gordon from Montana State may have a question for us.
Okay.
Well, Middle Tennessee State University, close, but no cigar. Do you find that athletes are held to a higher set of expectations or consequences than non-athletes in a university?
That's a tough question, because they're not held to different consequences based on like a finding. So, like their student athlete status is not necessarily considered when we decide what sanctions are going to be. But they have higher consequences than the normal student. And that kind of goes back to my example of, if regular college student gets arrested for, public intoxication, they go about their business, they handle it in court, nobody knows. But if student athlete is, at least here in Tuscaloosa, it's in the news. There are people calling that person names. They don't know anything about their situation. And, and I always tell them, like, you get arrested for, we'll just say dating violence. And dating violence, everybody thinks of it as, physical violence, but, let's say it's not physical violence. I'm trying to give a good example. But maybe our student athlete took somebody's phone and the person that they were in a relationship with said they threw it down, but they're saying they dropped it. All right. But the phone shatters, student athlete gets arrested. Then down the road, we figure out actually it was just dropped. It wasn't done, in a way to destroy the phone. So the charges get dropped. I have not once seen the big article saying, oh, by the way, basketball player Beth's charges were dropped and it was really a misunderstanding. It's just Beth was arrested for domestic violence, So I think they do have greater consequences in that regard.
There's a downside to the perks of being a college athlete.
There is, and I'll tell them sometimes too, nobody ever came to my door and asked me in my residence hall door and said, hey, Beth, can I have your autograph? Or can I hang out with you? That I didn't know. Well, nobody that I knew asked for my autograph. Let me just make that clear. But there weren't people that I didn't know trying to seek me out. So, I think there's good and bad, to having that. And that's where some of the safety planning that's particular to our student athletes comes in. To make sure they understand, like, you've got some greater consequences to the outside world. You're going to be treated the same as every other student here. But, you've got more to lose. And when you think about if I suspend a student for a semester, right, they could feasibly come back. If I suspend a student athlete for a semester, they probably can't get the hours they need to be back on the team, even if the coach would let them. So there's more consequences in that regard too. They not only, regular student loses a semester of time, student athlete loses a semester, a spot on the team, tutoring, counseling, through athletics and that sort of stuff. So yes and no, there are more consequences.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So are the types of issues you see between student athletes and the regular student population about the same, or do student athletes face some additional issues that regular students don't?
I think they're probably the same. And when I say probably, I think our training has worked in a way that I didn't anticipate. All right. So after it was probably my third or fourth year of doing all that in-person training and being, trying to purposefully be around, say hi and things like that. We started getting people saying, hey, I'm thinking about a no contact order. Can I talk to Miss Beth? All right. So I see where they have, maybe some relationship issues that the regular student doesn't, but I don't know if that's because they feel more comfortable coming to talk to me about that, or if it's because they have more issues. But I do think, especially, on an SEC campus or, where student athletes have, like the SEC network, things like that, that they are more recognizable and maybe at higher risk for people who don't necessarily want for them to succeed.
We have time for a few more questions. Sean has another one. So I'll read it. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, sorry. What role do you think the coach or the coaches of the team, in terms of teams that have obviously multiple coaches like football, play in Title IX compliance? And I ask this question because, as I mentioned, I'm an HR professor. A lot of my colleagues from across the country, mostly smaller schools, not big SEC schools, will ask me about these issues. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, being in the SEC, what role do you see based off the different types of coaches and the different programs that you all have?
I think it's huge. You know, if we had a coach that did not take the training seriously, players aren't going to take it seriously. You know, if the coach did not, so we make it clear to all of our student athletes, when you tell coach or when you tell an assistant coach, they're going to tell me. But then we also make it clear, and let me tell you what's going to happen at that point. All right, because we don't want them to be scared to talk to their coach either. But the coach sets the standard for the team, you know, and then the players set their culture. So if the coach is saying, you know, we're not going to tolerate this, you know, we're going to be respectful to the people we're dating, we're going to always get consent, then, you know, that filters out to the team as well. You know, and I can see, you know, the coaches who, you know, are really more involved. I like, you know, we will have, you know, coaches who report things that they're like, I think something might be going on, but I'm not quite sure. And I just want you to know. Great. That's wonderful. You know, so like it's on their mind. And, you know, it kind of goes up to the athletic director too. You know, I don't think he would mind me saying this, but at practically every coaches meeting, he will say, if you know about anything that should go to Title IX, you need to report it. All right, because we want our coaches to know, don't try to handle this. This, you know, you need to report that, let them handle it. You know, they're supporting your player. You know, but I mean, it's huge. It's huge. If the coach says it's not a big deal, then it's not going to be a big deal to the student athletes. So that's where it starts, in my opinion.
I think Robert Gordon has another question for us.
There might not be evidence to it, but I was just curious listening to the topic. The Title IX sexual allegations, do they occur in higher number with college athletes than with non-athletes, or is that about the same or not really trackable?
You know, I've seen articles that talk about that, and they will, you know, show higher percentages for college athletes. That's not something that I have necessarily seen here, but I'm honestly, I haven't done a lot of research into it. You know, and you kind of wonder, you know, how that comes about too with the research that's being done. You know, if we were to look at, you know, reports, we might have a higher number of people reporting things in athletic, meaning like this has happened to me or I'm worried about my friend in athletics because of the amount of training we do. You know, whenever you do a lot of training, you're going to get more reports. You know, so I'm not sure if that would be a correlation, but, you know, there has been some, you know, some articles come out that there are people doing research in that, but I'm just not sure all the research. I know, you know, a good bit of the litigation comes from sports.
Well, in society, you know, both people that are in athletics as well as entertainment have more of a sense of opportunity and entitlement and attention than civilians get. So they might find themselves in situations where they can make the wrong choice or possibly encouraged to make the wrong choice, which is maybe why, you know, the athletic programs focus on this a lot more than students that are in anthropology or biology or something.
Yeah,
I just didn't know if there was any statistics about that. Thank you.
no problem. And I mean, and you're absolutely right. You know, and that's why I tell them, you know, no one ever just propositioned me saying, hey, I will do this sexual thing to you. I don't know you, you know, but that happens to our student athletes. So what are we teaching them to let them know, like what that goes back to your good decision. What's a good decision here and what's not a good decision? You know, it might be you know, a good decision for your, you know, gratification, but is that a good decision 10 years from now? Is that a good decision for your family? Is that a good decision for your team? You know, and who's like, I will tell them all the time, who's in your circle? Do they care about you? Because they better, you know, and just try to make them understand like everybody is not in your best interest, and watch out for that.
Mike had a question.
So I was going to ask a question, Beth, that you may or may not answer that kind of talks back into our last speaker. And maybe not dealing with the sexual misconduct part, but the equity part of Title IX. And is that, do you see any possible implications of name, image, and likeness with regards to Title IX? And
I hadn't thought about that. You know, when people talk about, you know, paying student athlete, the athletic department's paying student athletes, I've wondered how that will shake out, you know, because do you pay them for the value that you perceive that they're bringing to the university, or do you pay them equitably? And is that equitable to say, you know, this is your value and this is your value, and we're going to pay you based on value, or do you pay them the same amount? But yeah, I haven't thought about the name, image and likeness situations, but I'll tell you something else that I'll just bring up here. I have also wondered how the transgender counts will do with the Title IX equity, you know, and how that will work. And you know, I think like most Title IX people, we're just going to see what the law says. But that's something that's emerging there, that we'll have to keep an eye on.
I think we might have time for one more question. I think Joan was going to say something.
No, Mike had a question.
I'm sure I typed it in the wrong chat section. No, one of the issues that I've read something about is that, you know, with universities cutting programs, cutting back because of the monetary financial issues, this raised a lot of Title IX issues about who gets cut and what's been cut. And there's a lot of complaining going on. And I'm wondering, you know, have you had conversations within your conference or within the NCAA about how in best practice, how to deal with that? Because I know it's really thorny and it's raised a lot of hackles all over the country. What do you know about that? Or what have you experienced with that? Or
Well, I have not. I am sure that some of our athletics folks in their different groups are having those conversations. But you have to look back at those, you know, the factors to determine if you are, you know, in compliance with Title IX. You know, so you're looking at things like the proportionality, and if you have, you know, or opportunity, things like that. So if you're cutting a women's team, then you have to make sure that, you know, you are still providing the same opportunities for women and men, which unfortunately would probably mean cutting, you know, a men's team too. And the goal of Title IX wasn't to cut any teams, you know, and I think, knock on wood, you know, it doesn't look like Alabama is going to, you know, be faced with that right now. But with COVID, that has made people have to make a lot of hard decisions. You know, and when you look at what you're going to cut, you have to think of what's cost the most, you know, and those are just financial decisions they have to make. But they, you know, within all of that, they have to still consider their Title IX compliance and making sure that they're still providing those equitable opportunities.
yeah, there have been, you know, like 60 Minutes reports, I think, where teams are GoFundMe pages to fund themselves,
Yeah.
just to try to maintain the balance, the proper balance, without losing the programs. But I just wondered if it had been a big issue that you've heard come up in conversation at the conference level, or maybe not the SEC, but the NCAA. Do they have a session on that, or they talk about that at the NCAA?
I'm sure they probably are, because I mean that's something that, you know, it has been a bigger issue in the last month or two as people are looking at their budgets and figuring out what they're going to do. You know, and when you think most sports aren't profitable, you know, you see like some, you know, the big ones are, but not everything is. And, you know, in some of the smaller schools, maybe no sports are profitable in, you know, monetary wise. So you really have to make those hard decisions. But those conversations would be more, you know, with our, you know, athletic director and assistant athletic directors than my area. Like I just come in and check things. So I'm sure if we were going to cut something, we would have an internal conversation here.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You're muted, Andrew.
I thought I hit unmute there. So thank you for sharing your experience today. We've kind of hit the top of the hour. So our next session is going to begin at 4 o'clock. That gives us a couple minutes at least for a break, perhaps.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, Beth.
Bye.
Thank you.
So like Andrew mentioned, we've got just a couple minutes to spare. We've been going straight through since 1 o'clock. So if you need to use the facilities, you've got 2 minutes. Tony, you should be set to be able to do share screen anytime you'd like. You're muted, baby.
Let me try that now. Can you see the?
Yep. You nailed it. First try.
How's that?
That's perfect.
Yay.
You've got a different background. I can't say.
I took the Gamecock back because every time I see you and I see the cocky on the background, I just chuckle. I just changed it.
I thought Beth had a really, really good presentation. I know you were only kind of half listening.
No, it was great. And I mean, there's overlap with some of her stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm going to stop the recording so that it's not so big.